The crystalline halls of the Celestial Crest restaurant glittered like a jewelry box under the artificial starlight of Station Omega 9. Katie Miller balanced a tray of exotic dishes with the kind of practiced ease that only came from 3 solid years of doing the same job day in and day out. Her black non-slip shoes clicked softly against the polished floor as she weaved between tables, careful not to bump into the various appendages that stuck out at unexpected heights. At 26 years old, she had gotten pretty good at this whole serving aliens thing. The station floated in deep space, a massive wheel of metal and glass where hundreds of species met to trade, negotiate, and occasionally try each other's food. Katie had taken the job to pay off her transport debt from Earth. Back home in Ohio, she had worked at a diner off Interstate 70. This was basically the same thing, just with weirder customers and better pay. She had learned to navigate the complex social rules of a dozen different alien species without breaking a sweat. Don't look the quorum directly in their central mass. Always serve the Valkyrie from the left side. Never, ever ask a Nexali if they are actually present or just a projection. Tonight felt different from the moment her shift started, though. The manager had called an all-staff meeting that morning, his face serious as he explained the situation. Tonight, the Dracari were coming to dine. Katie had seen plenty of strange aliens in her time on the station. The Valkyrie looked like giant praying mantises made of crystal and had clicking mandibles that never stopped moving. The quorum were basically intelligent jello molds that somehow managed to be pretentious about wine selections. She had even served the mysterious Nexali, who existed partially in another dimension and left generous tips despite never actually eating the food. But the Dracari were in a league of their own. They looked like the dragons from those old fantasy books Katie had loved as a kid. Massive scaled bodies covered in patterns that glowed and shifted colors like living mood rings. Long elegant necks, powerful limbs tipped with talons that could probably slice through steel, and eyes that seemed to see right through you into your soul. They were not just physically impressive either. The Dracari were famous across the galaxy as brilliant military strategists, cunning diplomats, and warriors who had never lost a major conflict in their 1,000-year history. Just having them in the restaurant made Katie's hands shake a little as she prepared her station. High Commander Veldar sat at the center table in the main dining room, and Katie could not stop sneaking glances at him. His scales shifted through deep purples and blues as he spoke to his officers in that weird harmonic language the Dracari used. It sounded like music and thunder at the same time. He was clearly the one in charge. The other Dracari deferred to him, their own scales dimming slightly in his presence as a sign of respect. Katie had been assigned to serve their table. Lucky her. She took a deep breath, picked up the first course, and approached with her eyes respectfully lowered. The restaurant manager had drilled the protocols into her head a dozen times. Do not make direct eye contact unless addressed. Move smoothly and quietly. Speak only when necessary. The Dracari valued efficiency and respect above all else. Your stellar orchid arrangement, Commander, Katie said softly, placing the delicate dish before him. The orchids were actually alive, their petals shifting through bioluminescent colors to match the Dracari's own glow. It was supposed to be a compliment or something. Veldar barely acknowledged her existence. His attention stayed fixed on the other side of the table, where the Valkyrie delegates sat with their insectoid bodies perfectly still. Katie recognized the tension in the air immediately. This was not just a fancy dinner. This was the peace summit everyone on the station had been whispering about for weeks. The Dracari and the Valkyrie had been in a cold war for decades, their fleets circling each other in an endless standoff. Tonight they were finally sitting down to talk peace. No pressure or anything. Katie moved to pour the wine, a rare vintage from somewhere in the Andromeda sector that cost more than she made in a month. The bottle felt heavy in her hands as she carefully filled the commander's glass. As the dark liquid flowed, something caught her eye. The wine caught the light strangely, showing a faint rainbow sheen on its surface, like oil on water. It seemed off somehow. Katie had served this exact wine before to other high-profile guests. It had never looked like that before. She hesitated for just a second, watching as the commander lifted his glass to his lips. His third claw, the small one near his wrist that the Dracari used for delicate work, twitched involuntarily. His scales flickered, dimming from their usual vibrant glow for just a moment before returning to normal. Katie stepped back from the table, her trained waitress instincts suddenly screaming that something was not right here. But what could she possibly know that these beings could not detect? The Dracari had senses far beyond human capability. They could see colors she could not imagine, hear sounds outside her range, and their technology was centuries ahead of Earth's. If something was wrong with the food or drink, their scanners would have caught it. She shook her head and returned to the kitchen, dismissing the nagging feeling in her gut. It was probably nothing. Just her nerves getting the better of her on the biggest night the restaurant had ever seen. Still, as she prepared the next course, Katie could not shake the feeling that she had just seen something important. Something everyone else had missed. 40 minutes into the dinner service, Katie's unease had grown from a small nagging feeling into something she could not ignore anymore. She stood at her station near the kitchen doors, pretending to check her order pad while her eyes stayed locked on the center table where Commander Velther sat with his delegation. She watched as the commander lifted his wine glass for the 4th time. Maybe the 5th. She had lost count. Each time he drank, his responses to his officers seemed to come just a beat slower than before. The bioluminescent patterns dancing across his scales, those beautiful shifting colors that she had learned indicated emotion and health in Dracary physiology, were flickering irregularly now. Like a light bulb about to burn out. On, off, dim, bright, with no rhythm or pattern to it. None of the other Dracary seemed to notice anything wrong. They were all leaning forward in their seats, deep in heated discussion with the Velcari delegates across the table. Their voices rose and fell in that musical language, occasionally switching to Galactic Common when they wanted to make a point the translators could pick up clearly. They were arguing about trade routes through the Kepler Belt, about military buffer zones near contested systems, about ancient grievances and future promises. The fate of billions of people hung on every word spoken at that table, and everyone in the room was focused entirely on the politics of it all. Everyone except Katie. She had learned to read people during her years working in food service. All kinds of people, human and otherwise. Back on Earth, her dad had run a small diner just outside Cleveland. Nothing fancy, just a place where truckers stopped for coffee and pie at 3 in the morning. Her dad had taught her the most important lesson of the service industry when she was just 16 years old, barely tall enough to see over the counter. "Watch the customers, Katie girl," he would say while flipping pancakes on the ancient griddle. "They tell you everything without saying a single word. How they hold their fork, how they breathe, how they look at their plate, whether they make eye contact or avoid it. That's how you know if something's wrong. That's how you know if they need help, even when they won't ask for it." Katie had carried that lesson with her across light years of space. It worked just as well on aliens as it did on tired truck drivers. Commander Velther was holding his wine glass wrong. His talons gripped it too tightly, not with the casual elegance the Dracary usually displayed. His breathing, which Katie could actually see in the rhythmic glow and dim of his chest scales, was becoming irregular. Fast, then slow, then fast again. And the way he looked at his wine glass when he thought no one was watching, there was confusion there. Maybe even fear, though Katie was not sure she could read Dracary expressions that well yet. Something was definitely wrong. During a lull between courses, when the servers were clearing appetizer plates and preparing to bring out the main dishes, Katie made a decision. She set down her tray and walked purposefully toward Krycian, the head of security for the Dracary delegation. Krycian was a female Dracary with silver scales that looked almost metallic under the lights. Her eyes moved constantly, cataloging every person, every movement, every detail in the room. She stood near the back wall, perfectly positioned to see everything. Katie's heart hammered in her chest as she approached. "Ma'am," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "I think something might be wrong with Commander Velther." Krycian's scales rippled in a wave pattern that Katie had learned meant amusement. It was not a kind amusement. "Your concern is noted, human," Krycian said, her voice carrying that harmonic quality all Dracary voices had. "However, all food and beverages served tonight have been scanned by our most advanced sensor arrays. Multiple times, in fact. Nothing dangerous was detected." "I know, but I just think." "Katie Miller, correct?" Krycian's eyes focused on her with an intensity that made Katie feel like she was being x-rayed down to her bones. "You are a waitress. A food service worker from a level 3 species. We are Dracary. We can detect molecular changes with our tongues. We see into infrared and ultraviolet spectrums your eyes cannot even process. We hear heartbeats from across a room, sense pheromone changes, detect trace chemicals in the air. If there were something wrong with the commander's food or drink, we would know. Our technology would know. Do you understand?" The message was crystal clear. "You are human. You are primitive. Stay in your lane." Katie nodded, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Yes, ma'am. I apologize for bothering you." She turned and walked back to her station, feeling foolish and small. Who was she to question beings with technology and senses far beyond anything humans possessed? Maybe she had just been nervous, seeing threats where none existed. The biggest dinner service of her life, and she was jumping at shadows. But 10 minutes later, as Katie approached the table to clear the next course, Commander Velther began to rise from his seat. His movements were slow and uncertain, like he was moving underwater. One of his officers reached out to steady him, confusion evident even across species. The restaurant's crystal lighting caught Veldar's scales at just the right angle, and Katie's breath caught in her throat. Her blood turned to ice. That color. That specific pattern of dim yellow-green spreading across his neck scales like a stain. She had seen it before. 3 years ago, during a boring night shift when the restaurant had been nearly empty. She had pulled up medical databases on her data pad, reading about alien physiology just to pass the time. There had been an article about Dracari toxicology, complete with pictures showing how their scales changed color in response to different poisons. That exact yellow-green pattern meant acute poisoning. Katie's heart began to race. If she was right, if that article had been accurate, then Commander Veldar had only minutes left to live. And nobody else could see it. Katie's mind raced backward through 3 years of memories, searching desperately for the information she knew was buried somewhere in her brain. It had been a slow Tuesday night, she remembered that much clearly. Her first month on the station, still getting used to the weird artificial day-night cycle and the smell of recycled air. The restaurant had been nearly empty. Just 2 Qorim at a corner table, slowly absorbing some kind of nutrient soup, and an elderly human couple celebrating their 50th anniversary. She had been bored out of her mind. So she had done what she always did when bored. She pulled up her data pad and started reading random articles. That night, she had been curious about the aliens she served every day. What made them tick? What kind of biology let a Velcari see in the dark or a Qorim survive in hard vacuum? She had pulled up medical databases, xenobiology journals, toxicology reports. Most of it had been completely incomprehensible, full of chemical formulas and molecular structures that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. But one article had stuck with her. Maybe because it mentioned something from Earth. Maybe because it had pictures. Maybe just because her brain decided to hold on to it for some reason. Thraxin 7. A compound found naturally in certain deep-sea earth fish. Anglerfish if she remembered right. The really ugly ones with the lights on their heads that lived miles below the ocean surface where sunlight never reached. The article had explained that Thraxin 7 was completely harmless to humans. People in Japan and parts of Scandinavia had been eating fish containing trace amounts of it for thousands of years with no problems. It was harmless to most alien species too. Just another organic compound in an ocean full of organic compounds. But to Dracari? The article had used words like catastrophically lethal and acute systemic failure. Katie remembered sitting in the empty restaurant, reading with growing fascination about why this one random fish chemical was so deadly to such an advanced species. The article had explained it in terms even she could understand. Thraxin 7 mimicked the molecular signature of something called S-atherin, a dietary supplement that Dracari consumed regularly. It was like their version of vitamin C or calcium, something their bodies needed but could not produce naturally. They got it from their food or from supplements. The problem was that Thraxin 7 looked exactly like S-atherin to Dracari biology. Same molecular shape, same chemical markers, same everything. Their scanners, programmed over centuries to recognize S-atherin as beneficial and necessary, would not flag it as dangerous. The compound would sail right through even the most advanced security checks. It would show up on scans as exactly what the Dracari were looking for, what their bodies needed. But once it got inside a Dracari system, it was not S-atherin at all. It crossed into their neural pathways and started shutting down their nervous system from the inside out. High concentrations could kill within minutes. The article had noted only one reliable way to detect Thraxin 7 before it was too late. Under visible light in what the article called the standard trichromatic human visible spectrum, Thraxin 7 created a specific iridescent sheen. A rainbow effect like oil floating on water. It was subtle, easy to miss if you were not looking for it, but it was there. The article had included a footnote that Katie remembered word for word because it had seemed so strange at the time. This visual marker is only detectable by species with trichromatic vision in the 380 to 740 nanometer range. Species with different visual spectrums, including but not limited to Dracari tetrachromatic vision, will not perceive this iridescence. Human vision. The article was talking about human vision. Dracari could see colors Katie could not even imagine. They saw into infrared and ultraviolet, could track heat signatures and detect light wavelengths that were completely invisible to human eyes. Their vision was vastly superior to humans in almost every measurable way. But they were completely blind to this one specific rainbow shimmer that human eyes could see perfectly. Evolution was funny that way, Katie thought distantly. You could be superior in 1,000 ways and still have one weird blind spot that nature forgot to cover. Commander Valdar swayed on his feet like a tree about to fall. His bioluminescence was fading rapidly now, his scales turning that sickly gray-green color that meant his system was shutting down. He reached out to steady himself on the table and missed, his coordination failing. Katie did not think, did not plan, did not consider the consequences. She just moved. Commander Valdar has been poisoned. Her voice cut through the restaurant chatter like a knife through butter. Loud, clear, impossible to ignore. Silence crashed over the room like a physical force. Every eye in the place turned toward her. Human eyes, Dracari eyes, Velcari compound eyes, even the quorum's weird sensing organs. Everyone stared. Krycian moved with frightening speed, crossing the distance between them in less than a second. She positioned herself between Katie and the commander, her scales flashing through angry reds and oranges. Human, you will stand down immediately. Look at the wine. Katie pointed at the glass still sitting on the table, her hand shaking but her voice steady. There is an iridescence in it that you cannot see. It is called Theraxin 7. It mimics Theron supplements so your scanners would not flag it as dangerous. But I can see it. Humans can see the wavelength marker that your vision cannot process. That is impossible, one of the Dracari officers hissed, his scales darkening with disbelief. Our technology is the most advanced in the sector. Our own biological senses are superior to any. Commander Valdar collapsed. His massive body hit the crystal floor with a sound like thunder. The wine glass shattered. And everything went to hell. Medical teams swarmed into the restaurant within seconds of Commander Valdar hitting the floor. Katie found herself roughly pushed back by security personnel as Dracari physicians surrounded the fallen commander. Their scaled hands moved with incredible precision and speed, pulling out medical scanners, injecting stabilizing compounds, checking vital signs that Katie could not even begin to understand. They worked like a well-oiled machine, each one knowing exactly what to do without needing to communicate. But Katie could see what they were doing, and her heart sank into her stomach. They were treating him for standard toxin exposure. Following standard emergency protocols. Injecting broad-spectrum antivenins, pumping his system with universal neutralizing agents, the kind of stuff that worked on 99% of all known poisons in the galaxy. And she knew with absolute certainty that it would not work for Theraxin 7. Worse than not working, it would actually speed up the process killing him. You are doing it wrong. Katie shouted over the chaos and commotion filling the restaurant. Other diners had jumped back from their tables. Station security was pouring through the doors. Someone was screaming in a language Katie did not recognize. It is not a standard toxin. You need chelation therapy with hypercalcium binding agents. Dr. Rathel, the lead physician in the Dracari medical team, turned to face her. His eyes blazed with anger and his scales flashed bright red, the Dracari color for fury. Human, this is a medical emergency. We are trained professionals. We have protocols that have been refined over centuries of practice. Your protocols are killing him. Katie's voice came out louder than she had ever heard it before. It surprised even her. The conviction in her voice, the absolute certainty, made even Dr. Rathel pause for just a second. Katie took advantage of that hesitation. She yanked her personal data pad from her apron pocket, her fingers flying across the screen with desperate speed. She pulled up the article she had read 3 years ago, scrolling frantically to find the section on treatment protocols. Here. Look at this. She shoved the pad toward the doctor. I read this 3 years ago and I know it sounds crazy, but please just listen. Theraxin 7 crosses the neural barrier in Dracari physiology. It mimics Theron so your body absorbs it thinking it is something good. Standard antivenin does not bind to it properly because your scanners think it is food, not poison. The antivenin actually accelerates the cascade failure by helping it spread faster through your nervous system. Katie was babbling now, words tumbling out faster than she could organize them properly. But somewhere in her panic, her memory was pulling up details she did not even know she had retained. All those random articles she had read during slow shifts. All that curiosity about the strange universe around her. All those nights of boredom when she had educated herself for no other reason than having nothing better to do. It was all coming together in this one critical moment. You need hypercalcium chelation therapy, you need it now, and you need to flush his system with a sodium-based solution to interrupt the molecular bonding. The hypercalcium binds to the Theraxin 7 and changes its shape so his body stops recognizing it as Theron. Then you can filter it out through his kidneys before it completes the neural shutdown. Dr. Rathel grabbed her data pad, his eyes scanning the article with incredible speed. Katie watched his face, watched his scales shift from angry red through confused orange to horrified pale blue. She saw the exact moment he understood. The moment doubt and disbelief gave way to horrified recognition that this primitive human waitress might actually be right. "Krytian, get me hypercalcium solution," he barked at the security chief, his voice suddenly urgent in a way it had not been before. "Now. Prepare the chelation array from the emergency medical kit. And someone verify the wine glass, scan it specifically for Thoraxin 7 compounds, not just general toxin screening." The medical team hesitated for just a heartbeat. Katie could see the conflict on their faces, in the uncertain flickering of their scales. They were being asked to trust a human waitress from a species barely out of their own solar system. Trust her over their own expertise, their own centuries of accumulated medical knowledge, their own advanced technology that could perform miracles Katie could barely comprehend. If she was wrong, Commander Veldar would die on this restaurant floor. The peace summit would collapse. The fragile truce between Dracari and Velcari would shatter into open warfare. Billions of lives hung in the balance. If she was right, someone had just tried to assassinate the most important military figure in the Dracari sovereignty. And they had nearly succeeded. The treatment began. Katie stood frozen in place, barely breathing as they injected new compounds into Veldar's system. She watched the hypercalcium solution flow through the foreline into his arm. Watched the chelation device they attached to his chest begin its work. For 20 long seconds nothing happened. The commander's bioluminescence continued to fade, growing dimmer and dimmer like a light bulb on its last bit of power. His chest barely moved. His scales had gone almost completely gray. Katie felt tears burning in her eyes. She had been wrong. She had just killed him with her arrogance, her certainty about something she had read once 3 years ago. Then, slowly, agonizingly slowly, color began to return to his scales. The sickly gray-green receded like a tide going out. It was replaced by healthier blues and purples spreading from his chest outward. His breathing steadied, deepened, became regular again. The bioluminescence brightened. He was going to live. Katie's knees went weak with relief. A security officer approached Krytian, leaned in close and whispered urgently in her ear. Katie saw the security chief's scales flash through shock, then pure cold fury. "The wine has been confirmed," Krytian announced to the room, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Thoraxin 7 concentrated to lethal levels. Enough to kill 5 Dracari. And we have found the source." She turned slowly to face the Dracari delegation, her eyes scanning across each officer until they fixed on one. A younger officer named Drellick who stood near the back. His scales had gone completely pale, drained of all color. His bioluminescence dimmed to almost nothing, the Dracari equivalent of going white with fear. Krytian's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow everyone in the restaurant heard it clearly. "This human has just prevented your assassination, Commander. And she has exposed a conspiracy that would have destroyed us all." 5 days later, Katie stood in the Hall of Harmonics inside the Dracari embassy, feeling very small and very human. The hall was enormous, with walls that seemed to shift and shimmer with colors she could barely process. Sound moved through the space in weird ways, creating harmonics that made her chest vibrate. Everything about this place was designed for Dracari senses, not human ones, and it made her feel like a child who had wandered into a place she did not belong. Commander Veldar had recovered fully. He stood at the front of the hall before an assembly of Dracari and human representatives, his scales displaying formal patterns that Katie had learned meant this was a high ceremony. Important. Official. The kind of thing that would be recorded in history books. Katie had been called to attend, though no one would tell her why. They had just sent a formal invitation to her quarters on the station, telling her to be here at exactly this time wearing her best clothes. She had shown up in the only dress she owned, feeling underdressed next to all the diplomatic uniforms and ceremonial scales. "The investigation is complete," Veldar began, his voice resonating through the hall in that way Dracari voices did. It was not just sound. It was like the air itself was carrying his words. "The assassination attempt was orchestrated by elements within my own military command. Officers who sought to frame the Velcari and reignite our conflict. They chose Thoraxin 7 specifically because they knew our sensors would never detect it. They believed themselves invisible in their perfect plan." He paused and his eyes found Katie in the crowd. She felt like a spotlight had been turned on her. They failed to account for a waitress from Ohio. Uncomfortable laughter rippled through the assembly. Katie felt her face flush hot with embarrassment. She wanted to sink through the floor and disappear. Everyone was looking at her now. "We Dracari pride ourselves on superiority," Veldar continued, his voice growing more serious. We see into spectrums that are invisible to most species in this galaxy. We hear harmonics that others cannot perceive. We can taste molecular structures with our tongues and track heat signatures with our eyes. Our technology surpasses that of most civilizations by centuries, perhaps millennia. We have convinced ourselves that we are the pinnacle of evolution, the peak of what biological life can achieve. His scales shifted to darker colors, showing what Katie had learned was shame. And in this pride, in this absolute certainty of our own superiority, we became blind to our own blindness. Veldar stepped down from the podium and walked directly toward Katie. The crowd murmured in surprise. He crossed the distance between them and then did something that made several Dracari gasp audibly. He lowered his head to Katie's level, bringing his eyes even with hers. It was a gesture of profound respect, the kind of thing a Dracari would only do for someone they considered an equal or a superior. Katie Miller saw what we could not see, he said, his voice softer now but still carrying through the hall. Not despite her human limitations but because of them. Her eyes, evolved for a single yellow star and one ordinary world, perceived the exact wavelength we cannot process. She recognized a pattern of behavior that our protocols dismissed as irrelevant. She remembered information from a casual reading 3 years ago, information she had no practical reason to retain, no logical reason to recall. And most importantly, she trusted what she saw even when beings of supposedly superior intelligence told her she was wrong. Veldar's scale shifted to brilliant gold, and Katie had learned this color indicated the highest honor in Dracari culture. This is the strength of humanity. Not advanced sensors. Not superior biology. Not technology or size or power. But adaptability. Pattern recognition developed through millions of years of evolution on a dangerous world. Trust and instinct, in that inner voice that says something is wrong even when logic cannot explain why. And above all, the wisdom to pay attention to details that others dismiss as insignificant. The ceremony continued with speeches and formal declarations that Katie barely processed. She was offered a position in something called the Cross-Species Perception Research Institute, a new organization dedicated to studying how different species perceive the universe in different ways. The peace treaty with the Velcari was signed right there in the hall, stronger now that the conspiracy had been exposed and the real enemy identified. New protocols were being established across all of Dracari space, specifically incorporating what they now called perceptual diversity analysis. But for Katie, the most meaningful moment came afterward, when the crowd had dispersed and she found herself alone with Dr. Rathel in a quiet side chamber. "You changed everything," the doctor told her, his scales showing what she had learned was embarrassment. "I nearly let my pride kill him. I was so certain that human senses were primitive, inferior, not worth considering. I almost made a fatal mistake because of my arrogance." Katie smiled, a small tired smile. "Our senses are primitive compared to yours. We cannot see what you see or hear what you hear. We cannot taste molecules or track heat signatures. But primitive does not mean useless. It just means different." "Yes," Dr. Rathel agreed, his scales shifting to a thoughtful blue. "We are learning that lesson now. Perhaps we should have learned it long ago, before our pride almost cost us everything." 6 months later, Katie returned to Earth for a visit. She sat in her dad's diner just outside Cleveland, drinking coffee that somehow tasted better than anything the station could produce despite being made with a machine that was probably older than she was. "So let me get this straight," her father said while wiping down the counter with a rag that had seen better days. "You stopped the Galactic War because you remembered something you read during a slow shift 3 years ago?" "Pretty much," Katie said, warming her hands on the coffee mug. "And because I trusted what I saw when everyone told me I was wrong." Her father smiled, that knowing smile he had given her countless times growing up. The same smile when she had correctly guessed what a customer wanted before they ordered. The same smile when she had known someone was having a bad day just from how they walked through the door. "That is my girl. Always said you had good instincts. Your grandmother had them too. Runs in the family, I guess." Katie looked up through the diner's front window at the night sky. The stars were just starting to come out as the sun set over the Ohio horizon. Somewhere up there, the Dracari were rewriting their entire approach to dealing with other species. Somewhere up there, protocols were being changed, assumptions were being questioned, and a whole civilization was learning that being advanced did not mean being complete. That having superior abilities did not mean having all the answers. All because a waitress from Earth had paid attention to the little things. Had trusted her instincts. Had spoken up when everyone told her to stay quiet. Sometimes, Katie thought as she sipped her coffee, that was enough. Sometimes paying attention to the details everyone else missed was everything. And maybe, just maybe, that was what humanity could offer to the rest of the galaxy. Not superior technology or stronger bodies or longer lives. Just the simple ability to notice the things others overlooked and the courage to speak up about them. That seemed like enough to her.